My name is Jackson Ride. I'm 34. By day, I was a janitor, just another forgettable face mopping floors on the bottom level of Vertex, a tech company in Austin that specialized in data analytics for small businesses. By night, I slept in an old Ford F-150 parked behind the employee lot. Winter wind sliced through the taped-up cracks of the windows, but I stayed there closer to the real world I once dreamed of entering. Not through the back door, dragging a mop, but through the front, as someone who belonged. I've done just about every job nobody else wanted. Dock loader, casino dishwasher, roadkill cleanup in the Nevada desert. Jobs that made people scoot away from me on the bus because the stench clung to my sleeves. And in every job, I kept a little notebook in my back pocket, scribbling down the wild ideas that came to me while scrubbing toilets or burying rotting deer under dry sand. I didn't know if any of them would ever mean anything, but writing them down was the only way I didn't turn into just another piece of equipment in someone else's world. Still, none of that prepared me for that morning. It was 7:42. I was cleaning the third-floor hallway. The floor was still slick from the soapy water when I heard Richard Holt's voice echo from the conference room across the hall. I don't care what the excuse is. If the report isn't on my desk by 8, consider your paycheck short this month. His voice scraped the air like metal dragged across tile. I didn't look up, just kept mopping though my hands were trembling. Last night, my dad got admitted to the ER again after a second stroke. I had no insurance, no family support, just a few creased bills folded into the back pocket of my work pants. When my phone buzzed in my pocket, I fumbled to check it. In the process, the mop handle knocked over my bucket. Water spilled fast, rushing toward the server room. My stomach dropped. I dove to my knees, grabbing towels and trying to soak it up as fast as I could. Cold sweat broke across my forehead, even though the air conditioning was blasting. And then Richard showed up. Gray suit, shiny Rolex, a black espresso in his hand. He stopped cold when he saw me, soaked, crouched on the floor with a rag in my hand. Behind him, a group of interns and IT staff had just stepped off the elevator. "What is this?" Richard asked. His voice wasn't loud, just cold. I knocked the bucket over. "I'm cleaning it up now," I said, eyes glued to the floor. "How long have you worked here?" he asked, stepping closer. 3 years. 3 years. And you still don't know where to place a mop bucket. The air stiffened. I felt every pair of eyes behind him. One intern stifled a laugh behind her hand. A young engineer nudged me aside with his leg like I was a piece of misplaced furniture. "I got a server maintenance alert just yesterday," Richard continued, "and now you've got water seeping toward a data system worth millions." I tried to stand, still holding the soaked rag. "There's no damage." I cleaned it up, silence. He snapped. He turned. A nearby assistant handed him a tablet. He tapped a few times, then looked at the screen and curled his lip into a smirk. "You're Jackson Ride? Yes?" He nodded. Then, from his blazer pocket, he pulled out my employee badge, God knows when he swiped it and flicked it onto the wet floor. "You're terminated. Effective immediately." The plastic hit the tile with a sharp, dry smack, like a slap to the face. I stood there frozen. Nobody said a word, but I could hear everything. The thudding of my heart, the quiet shuffle of leather shoes on linoleum, a soft laugh from down the hall. Someone who gave me a slice of bread the day before now turned and walked away without a glance. I didn't cry, didn't scream, I knelt down and picked up the soggy badge. My hand trembled. The cheap plastic was cold and slick with suds. My name blurred behind the white foam. I wanted to punch the light panel above me, to scream at him, "I'm not trash," but instead, I lowered my head and cleaned up the rest of the spill, wiped every inch, like nothing had ever happened. I could feel Richard watching me from above, the look of a man who knew he'd crushed someone and didn't care enough to look back. But I was different. I wasn't just mopping a spill. I was mopping up the last drops of dignity I had left. I was picking myself up off that filthy floor, and I was not going to forget this. I would never forget. Not just to take down Richard Holt, but to build something of my own, a kingdom where no one has to get on their knees to wipe up their pride. I didn't leave the Vertex parking lot that day. I lay in my truck the entire afternoon. Seat reclined. Window cracked open just enough for air to pass through. The Texas sun baked the metal shell around me. In my pocket, my employee badge was still damp, sticky with soap suds, pressing against a crumpled stack of unpaid hospital bills for my father. I stared up at the stained ceiling of the truck, patched together with duct tape, then down at the battered blue notebook beside me. It was the only thing I'd kept since I was 26. Back when I was cleaning up decomposing animal corpses in the Nevada desert. I once scribbled into that notebook, "Develop a heat-sensing app to locate decomposing bodies faster." It sounded insane, but I always wrote down every wild idea that popped into my head. Sometimes, while scrubbing bathroom tiles, I'd suddenly start thinking about data, sequences, and repetition. I never went to college. Dropped out at 17 to raise my little sister after our mom died of cancer. But I had one thing no one could teach: an obsessive kind of persistence. That night, I drove to a public library lot near a gas station, parked under a broken lamppost, opened my cracked screen phone, piggybacked off the McDonald's Wi-Fi across the street, and typed "free AI course for beginners." I didn't even know what I was looking for. I just knew one thing: Richard Holt loved AI. One time, while cleaning the conference room, I overheard him bragging about how artificial intelligence would soon replace hundreds of low-value workers. I was that low-value worker, wasn't I? Then I would learn. I would become the very thing he claimed I could never reach. I started with the most basic YouTube videos: what is machine learning? Intro to algorithms. How neural networks work. I didn't understand half of it, but I wrote down every term in my notebook. Every day, I got to the library early, plugged in my earphones, opened up free Coursera courses, and read every word, repeating each example to myself until it clicked. I didn't own a laptop, just a busted Samsung phone. But I learned whatever I could: Python, data analysis systems, blockchain, how to set up a decentralized database. How did I even make sense of blockchain? I pictured it like a row of public restrooms. Every user leaves a trace. And if you don't clean thoroughly, the stink spreads through the whole system. So I needed a system one where every action was clean, transparent, and nothing could be swept under the rug. The first idea came while I was picking up trash after a local street fair. I noticed the sponsors had no clue how to manage the customer data they were collecting. Handwritten names, email addresses, all lost, no behavior tracking, no insights, nothing. I wrote in my notebook a blockchain-based system for small businesses to verify and store customer behavior, secure, transparent. No advanced IT skills required. I didn't know what it would become, but it was a seed. During the day, I took shifts waiting tables at a Mexican diner. At night, I studied. In between, I picked up odd cleaning jobs. I cut every expense: no beer, no friends, no Netflix, just the truck, a few clothes, the phone, and that notebook. Some nights, I'd be running a fever, curled up in the truck while rain leaked through the roof and dripped cold down my neck. Still, I'd watch videos on how to code a user interface. I remember one instructor smiling on screen and saying, "Don't let the code scare you. It's just like cooking. Follow the recipe and make it your own." It sounded silly, but to me it was magic. I thought of my mother. She used to make chicken soup from the cheapest scraps she could find. She always said, "As long as you remember each step, you'll never go hungry." Now, I just needed to remember the steps. I taught myself how to build a basic backend with Python, how to integrate blockchain into a simple authentication system, how to write a working API. I tested my prototype on people I met while delivering food, flea market vendors, corner shop owners. Most of them didn't even understand what data meant. But when I said this app helps you track who bought what, when, and no one can mess with your numbers, they started to nod. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. I called the first demo CiviGuard a protector of trust between businesses and their customers. I knew I wasn't enough on my own, but I had a product, I had a story, I had a reason to try. What I didn't know was that my next step would lead to the most brutal betrayal of my life, one that would nearly destroy the dream I had just begun to build. I called it Gray Friday, even though the sun was blazing that day. I had just finished serving at a small local business seminar when I met Jeremy Fall, who introduced himself as an investment advisor for a tech angel group out of Dallas. Tall, white, wearing a textured blazer, with a self-assured grin laced with just enough smugness to let you know he valued his time more than you ever could. "You're the guy behind CiviGuard, right?" he asked while I was wiping down a coffee table near the demo area. I nodded, a little guarded. "It's a clever concept," he said. "I've invested in 3 similar platforms, but what stands out is, you're not like other founders." "How so?" I asked, tightening my grip on the notebook in my pocket. "You don't talk like a tech guy. You talk like someone who's been screwed and wants to make sure nobody else has to go through that." I didn't say a word. He was right. CiviGuard was born out of rage, out of knowing what it feels like to be stepped on. I wasn't some MIT graduate with polished pitch decks, but I knew how it felt to be discarded by a system built to forget people like me. Jeremy studied me for a moment, and then handed me his card. "I'm offering $50,000 in exchange for 15% equity, if that sounds fair. Meet me in Austin next week. I'll help you raise a seed round. I've got connections." I spent 3 days wrestling with the decision. I didn't know the first thing about investment terms, had never seen a cap table, didn't even have my company legally structured yet. But 50 grand. That was more than I'd ever had a shot at. I said yes. 3 weeks later, I signed my first ever investment agreement, no lawyer, no witness. Just me and Jeremy at a cafe booth. The money hit the account under my newly registered LLC. I hired 2 computer science students from UT to help build the MVP. I cried when I saw the first working dashboard come to life, but the joy lasted less than a month. One morning, I showed up to the co-working space we rented and everything was gone. Equipment repossessed, lease terminated, company email accounts deactivated, bank account drained. I called Jeremy. Line disconnected. I called the bank. They told me the full withdrawal had been made 48 hours earlier by a co-owner on the account, Jeremy Fall. Panic. I went back to the contract. In a buried appendix I hadn't read closely, Jeremy had slipped in a clause naming himself a principal signatory on the company account. I, an uneducated fool, had just handed him the keys to everything. That night, I sat alone in the familiar parking lot, throat dry. In my hands, a cold cup of instant noodles and a notebook filled with code snippets and wireframes that no one gave a damn about anymore. I thought about quitting. I'd lived like a roach under bridges for 3 years, and the moment I crawled into the light, I got crushed under the wheels of a legal system I didn't even understand. I broke down. For the first time in years, I cried. And then, my phone lit up. A message from Tony, one of the student coders. Hey, Jax. I heard what happened. If you want to rebuild, I'm in. No pay needed. I still believe in this. I read that text over and over like a drowning man clutching a thread of air. No one had ever believed in me my whole life. But if even one person did, then I couldn't give up. We rebuilt from scratch. Tony and I worked out of coffee shops, stole Wi-Fi, coded till midnight. I logged every mistake. I read legal books. I cold-called free startup legal clinics. I learned how to write contracts, how to budget, how to pitch by telling my story. Every time fear gripped me, I thought back to that moment Richard hurling my ID badge into a puddle. That wasn't just trauma anymore. It was fuel. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was Jackson Ryde, and I wasn't going to drown because of some wolf in investor's clothing. A year after the scam, I demoed CiviGuard 2.0 at a small business expo. But this time, I was behind the table, wearing a clean button-up, my hands steady, my eyes clear. An older woman approached, studying the signage. "You the founder?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded, smiled faintly. "Good job. But if you're going to build a real company, you'll need more than just tech." I looked at her gray hair, sharp eyes, calm and calculating. "My name's Linda Carter," she said. "I once lost an entire company because I trusted the wrong person. But I learned how to start over. I didn't know it then, but I had just met the person who would change everything. Linda Carter wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. At 62, she walked into a room like she was the spotlight. Sharp eyes, silver hair pinned tight at the back. Dressed in a simple black suit, but every detail on her said, "I've had it all, and I don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore." Our first real conversation was in a rundown cafe off South Congress. I ordered the cheapest black coffee. She ordered a double espresso and didn't blink once while I told her about CiviGuard, about Jeremy Fall, and the nights I spent sleeping in my truck. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "You're not the first to get scammed," she said. "And you're not the first trying to build a startup off grit and hope. But the reason I'm interested in investing isn't your tech. It's the way you talked about your pain. Calm. No begging for pity." I swallowed hard. Linda had once been the CEO of a health tech company called Aegis Mind, built it from nothing, took it into the multi-millions, and then lost it all when her co-founder, someone she once called her honorary little brother, stabbed her in the back. 2 years in court, everything gone. But she didn't walk away from startups. She shifted, became an angel investor for founders who had crashed, burned, and still had the guts to fly again. She invested $20,000 in me, not a huge amount, but it came with conditions. I had to stay in Austin, enroll in her 3-month startup boot camp, and learn how to survive the startup world before dreaming of owning it. I said yes. I'd never gone to college, but those 3 months felt like a crash course MBA compressed and on fire. Linda taught me how to read a cap table, how to negotiate investor terms, how to answer hard questions without flinching. I learned how to push back in meetings, how to spot strategic partners versus tech parasites. She made me pitch every week, in front of other founders, in front of seasoned advisors who didn't flinch at blood. One time I froze up when asked about our churn rate. She didn't comfort me. She just said, "You can shake, but no customer's going to pay for shaky." I learned to debug at 3 to turn down contracts with shady clauses, to believe in my product when everything around me was chaos. But the most important thing I learned from Linda was the power of ecosystem. Startups don't survive alone. I had to connect. I had to give even when I didn't have much. So I started uploading my notes online, hosted coffee chats for undergrad IT students without mentors, ran free workshops teaching local shop owners how to use CiviGuard. One day I sat down with an older woman selling tacos at the flea market. When I showed her how she could track which customers came back most often, she exclaimed, "Now I know who my regulars are," and that was it. That was the moment I realized the tech I'd built mattered. With Linda, I wasn't just learning how to build a startup. I was learning how to lead. One afternoon, she took me to the headquarters of an angel investor group in Austin. During the pitch session, I stood in front of nearly 20 investors. My palms were sweaty, but for the first time, I didn't shake. I told them my journey. From janitor to scam victim to solo rebuilder, I wasn't selling a unicorn fantasy. I said, "I don't want CiviGuard to be a unicorn. I want it to be a mule, stubborn, resilient, and impossible to knock off its path when the road gets steep." The room went silent for a beat. Then came the applause. I didn't get funding that day, not right away. But after the session, a female investor walked up to me. She said, "You're not a smooth talker, but you're real. I'll wire $100,000 next week. Call me if you need more." I walked out of that building without really remembering how my feet moved. All I knew was I wasn't that janitor mopping suds off the third-floor tile anymore. I was a founder. I had a company, a product, a team, and even though I hadn't said a single word of revenge, Vertax was starting to feel the heat. 1 year after that pitch session, CiviGuard had become a name passed around in Austin's startup circles. We didn't explode in some flashy, Hollywood-style media blitz. We spread quietly like roots threading their way underground, taking hold in laundromats, corner pharmacies, family-run gas stations, and local restaurant chains. Every client we signed was someone who understood why we existed, to make sure no one stayed blind to their own data. We built our product out of real pain, real solutions, for real people who had been dismissed, just like me. When CiviGuard was named one of the top 25 sustainable data startups in the southern U.S., we got invited to podcasts, and media started paying attention. I avoided deep-dive interviews about my backstory. I wanted the product to speak, not my sob story. But I forgot one thing. The past doesn't speak, but it always listens. The first week of September, I got a strange email from a tech journalist named Melissa Drew. Subject line: former Vertax employee behind CiviGuard. The message was short: Jackson Ride. Did you previously work at Vertax? I have a few details to verify before running a story on the origins of CiviGuard. I'd appreciate a candid conversation. I had never publicly mentioned that part of my life. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want anyone thinking I was trying to spin some underdog angle for attention. But what made my stomach turn wasn't the email itself. It was the name CC'd at the bottom, Richard Holt. I knew right then this wasn't a coincidence. 4 days later, The article dropped on a major tech news site. Civiguard faces questions over alleged idea overlap with founder's former employer. I read it with shaking hands. The piece quoted anonymous sources who claimed Civiguard's foundational concept resembled an internal project Vertex shelved back in 2018. No one had to tell me who the puppet master was. Richard Holt. He didn't need to attack me directly. All he had to do was plant the seed of doubt and let the media do the rest. I called Melissa. She answered, cool and distant. I'm just presenting multiple perspectives, but Mr. Holt seems very interested in clarifying Civiguard's origin story. That afternoon, I returned to the office, 14 team members, working full throttle. Tony walked over, concerned. Are we in trouble? He asked. I didn't answer right away. I opened my laptop and pulled up an old video Richard speaking at a Vertex-sponsored conference. I remembered his face as he said, at Vertex, we build the platforms. Janitors. They just need to stay out of the engineer's way. I stood up. I've got a plan. I told Tony, we're not going to deny the past, but we're not stooping to his level either. I started reaching out to former Vertex employees, engineers who had left after being exploited, admin staff who'd endured Richard's tirades. I asked them to confirm the truth that Vertex had never developed a product like Civiguard, and that Richard had outright mocked the concept of data transparency. One of them, Dale, former head of QA, sent an email ending with, I remember you. You handed me a tissue once after Richard screamed at me in front of the entire floor. Send me the docs, I'll go on record. I compiled everything and sent it to Linda, who still kept a watchful eye over me like a silent mother who didn't say much but missed nothing. She looked through it, nodded once, and said, you don't need to strike back like he does. Just take off his mask. So I set up Civiguard's first live stream. No marketing push, no flashy intro, just me, standing in front of a camera, talking about how sometimes a platform isn't born from a big idea, but from a personal scar. I talked about our earliest customers, about how every line of code in our system came from a lesson I learned through failure. I didn't smear Richard, but I was clear Vertex didn't build Civiguard. Their disdain built it. Their dismissal of people like me, that was the spark. The video hit 200,000 views in 2 days. Not a single investor pulled out. Old clients called to say, I don't care who came up with it, as long as it keeps helping my business. But I knew Richard wasn't finished. Because when someone who once saw you as trash is forced to listen to you, they start to fear you. And when a man fears losing his power, he'll stop at nothing to drag you back into the dirt. So I started preparing for the final war. 3 months after the smear campaign failed, Vertex officially filed for bankruptcy. The news didn't surprise me. I'd seen it coming. Former engineers had been calling me for months, telling me the company was bleeding contracts. Clients were raising red flags about security. And most telling of all, the execs had started quietly pulling out personal investments. But what did stop me cold was a name I saw in an email invite from the Austin Data and Integrity Summit, a major tech conference for startups, investors, and data giants across the region. Keynote speaker Richard Holt, former CEO of Vertex. Topic: data transparency and corporate responsibility in the post-AI era. I laughed. The man who once sneered at transparency was now on stage preaching ethics. But I wasn't angry. I saw an opportunity. I reached out to the event organizers and signed Civiguard up as a silver-level sponsor. Not flashy, but enough to get us a product booth and, more importantly, a speaking spot on the panel Data Governance Solutions for Small and Mid-Sized Businesses. I didn't say a word to Linda. I just told Tony, get the new product demo ready, and make sure we record the entire session, the day of the summit. I wore a black suit, white dress shirt, no tie. My hair was neatly cut. My face didn't carry that wide-eyed, floor-mopping look anymore. I passed by the old Vertex booth, just a name now. Empty. No staff. Richard hadn't arrived yet. When the panel began, I stepped onto the stage with 3 other founders and the moderator. Richard sat in the front row. I saw him, same Rolex from back then, but now with graying hair and eyes that didn't hold the same confidence. He looked at me surprised for a second, then covered it with a weak, polite smile. I spoke first. Calm. Steady. I never went to college. I used to clean the toilets of a tech company. I wasn't even allowed to walk through the meeting rooms of. But today, I'm the founder of a platform helping over 700 small businesses track and verify user data with full transparency. I didn't build this out of revenge. I built it because I know what it's like to be blind in a world of data, and I never want anyone else to be left in the dark. The room was dead silent. The moderator asked, "What do you think causes companies to fail at maintaining data transparency?" I looked directly at Richard, and for the first time, I didn't look away. I don't think it's a tech problem. I think it's a people problem. People who believe power excuses them from responsibility. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. After the panel, I walked straight off stage into the green room, and there he was, Richard Holt, waiting for me. "Jackson," he said. His voice was dry. "You've done well. I don't need your compliment. You think I'm afraid of you?" I looked at him. The man who once made me pick my ID badge out of a puddle now stood in front of me, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched with a bitterness he couldn't swallow. "I don't care if you're afraid," I said. "I'm not here to be your fear. I'm here so you have to see me." He laughed, a broken, hollow sound. "You think you've won?" "Huh." I lowered my voice, steady and soft. "No, Richard. I won the day I got down on my knees and cleaned up that spill." 2 weeks later, a clipped video from the panel went viral on Twitter. I built my company from the floor they told me I didn't belong on. The press called me the degreeless founder teaching tech the meaning of transparency. Investors flooded in. We received a partnership offer from a major tech fund in California. Linda texted me just one line, "Welcome to the real stage." I thought that was the end of it. Until one Monday morning, I opened my inbox and saw the subject line, "Subject Technical Staff Position Application. Richard Holt." I clicked it open. "Jackson, I have nothing left. If Civigard needs someone with systems experience, I still have skills. I'm willing to work under you, just need a chance to start again." I sat there in silence. For the first time, I didn't feel rage. I forwarded the email to Linda with one line attached. "He's where I once was, and I'm not there anymore." I never replied to him, because sometimes silence is the loudest victory bell there is. It was the first winter I didn't sleep in a truck. I stood before the glass wall on the 27th floor of our new downtown Austin office, watching the crowd below hustle past in a blur of headlights and city breath. The yellow glow from the buildings nearby caught my hair, now streaked faintly with silver. In my hand was a cup of coffee, brewed just right, bitter, black, no sugar. Like the years I lived without daring to dream anything sweet. Behind me, on the desk, sat my old Vertex ID badge, sealed now in a clean plastic frame. Next to it, a contract from New York, one of 3 finance conglomerates trying to buy a stake in Civigard. I didn't sell. I didn't build this company to exit and disappear. I built CiviGuard to create a world with no invisible floors. A world where someone who once scrubbed tiles could now protect other people's data and their dignity. Our office now had nearly 70 employees, working in small pods. No exec floors, everyone just called me Jax, not Mr. Ride. Even the receptionist had the authority to revise workflows if something didn't make sense. That was the ecosystem I'd built, one that reflected me, not the man I used to be. One afternoon, Tony brought in a beat-up storage box he found in the back room. Inside were scraps of old sketches, hand-drawn UI mock-ups I'd scribbled back when I barely knew how to use Canva, and my weathered blue notebook. The first page still bore the water stain from the night rain dripped through the roof of my truck. I flipped through the pages, crooked handwriting, half-baked ideas I no longer needed to Google. I saw a version of myself from those cold nights, huddled in a parking lot, thinking the world had thrown me away. But I didn't die with that feeling. I lived through it. That night. I sat with Linda on her balcony, sipping wine, looking out over the city. She didn't say much, just watched me, then smiled softly. "You know," she said, "at first, I thought you'd make a great founder, but now I think you're someone who changes systems." I chuckled and shook my head. I just wanted to live right and make sure some people never forget. There was once someone they dismissed. Linda raised her glass. And that's the beginning of every revolution. 3 months later, I got a formal invitation, keynote speaker at SXSW, topic from mop water to blockchain. A startup journey without privilege. I walked onto that stage to roaring applause, under the lights. I didn't see Richard anywhere. Maybe he'd left Austin. Maybe he was sitting in some dark room, watching me on a screen, wondering when the world flipped upside down. I didn't start my talk with theory. I started with memory. I used to mop the hallways of a data company. One day, I spilled some water and got fired in front of everyone. That day, I thought, this is rock bottom. But rock bottom isn't the end. It's where you get the clearest view of everything above and decide where to climb. The room went still, no cameras clicking, no whispers. I continued. I didn't build CiviGuard for revenge, but I didn't forgive by forgetting either. I remembered every glance, every smirk, and turned it into the operating system behind my product. In a world full of algorithms, never forget emotions are still the most honest data we've got. After the talk, a middle-aged man approached me. His face was aged, posture humbled, eyes familiar. I recognized him instantly, an old engineer from Vertex, one of the rare few who once handed me a donut while I mopped the floor outside the third-floor server room. He reached out and shook my hand. Firm. "You did it," he said, voice thick with feeling. "For all of us." I gripped his hand and nodded. Not just for me. For everyone who was ever kicked out of a room and came back to build the whole damn building.